Hola, so in today's video, we're going to be going over regular verbs in the present tense. So if you remember from Spanish 1, how many types of verbs were there? There were 3. You had verbs that end in AR, ER, and IR. So those are some of the verbs that you learned: hablar, caminar, estudiar, patinar. So if you look at them, they all end in AR. Comer, leer, beber, beber. Those are all verbs that end in ER. And then you have verbs that end in IR, such as compartir, abrir, escribir, vivir. So let's go over the endings for the regular verbs in the present tense. What were the endings for verbs that end in AR? You have OAS, a, amos, ais, an, accent on the A in the vosotros form. The endings for ER verbs were OS, hemos, ais, en, accent on the E in the vosotros form, and for IR verbs, OSE, imos, is, en. So if you had a verb that ended in AR, such as nadar, which means to swim, remember, if you were going to conjugate it in the present tense, what you do is you keep the stem of the verb. So for all forms, you would keep nad, and then you just add the appropriate endings, such as nado, nadas, nada, nadamos, nadais, and nadan. So yo nado would mean I swim. Tú nadas. You swim. Él nada. He or she swims. Nosotros nadamos. We swim. Vosotros nadáis. You all swim. And then ellas nadan. They swim. Or you all swim, right? So that's how you would conjugate a verb that ends in AR. If you wanted to conjugate a verb that ends in ER, such as comer, you follow a similar pattern. You keep the stem of the verb, in this case it's com, and now you're going to add the ER endings. So it's como, comes, come, comemos, comes, and comen. So if you wanted to conjugate an IR verb, such as escribir, which means to write, follow a similar pattern. You keep the stem, which is escrib, and then you're just going to add the appropriate ending. So in this case, it would be escribo, escribes, escribe, escribimos, escribís, and escriben. Let's practice. We have Elena, todos los días en su casa. How would you conjugate that verb? Leer. It's going to be leer, since we're talking about Elena. It's the she form, right? That's our subject. That's why it's leer. Carlos, la guitarra con sus amigos. So the verb is tocar. How would you conjugate it? We're talking about Carlos, so it's going to be toca. Mis hermanos y yo la computadora en el parque. You have the verb usar. How would you conjugate it? It's usamos. The subject is my brothers and I, right? So it's the we form. Mateo, ¿dónde practicas el piano? En la casa de mi abuela. So even though you don't have a verb in the second sentence, if you look at the question, you have a verb in the question. The verb is practicar. So how would you answer that question? It would be practico, since we're asking you, Mateo, and then you respond in the yo form. And then, mi familia y yo en una casa grande. The verb is vivir. How would you conjugate it? Vivimos. My family and I live in an enormous or a big house, right? So that was a review of the how do you conjugate a verb in the present tense. Hasta luego, chicos.